Richard Miller had always believed that honesty was the foundation of any solid relationship. At 42, he had built what he considered an exemplary life: a thriving consulting firm, 2 teenage children he adored, Emma and T. Weiler, and 15 years of marriage to Sarah, the woman he thought he knew completely. But there are truths that hide in the shadows, waiting for the exact moment to emerge and shatter all the certainties we thought were unshakable. Life has a peculiar way of teaching us its hardest lessons. Many times we believe we know those we love, that we share not just the bed and table, but also the deepest dreams and fears. How often do we look at our spouse and think, "This person is my soulmate, my safe harbor"? How many nights do we sleep peacefully, confident that our family is protected by unbreakable bonds of love and loyalty? But reality can be a sharp blade, cutting through our illusions with the cruel precision of a surgeon. Richard was about to discover that not everyone who claims to love us is worthy of our trust. And when betrayal knocks on our door, we have 2 choices: let it destroy us or transform it into the tool of our own liberation. What would you do if you discovered that your entire life had been a carefully orchestrated lie? If you knew that while you worked tirelessly to provide the best for your family, someone very close was conspiring to destroy everything you had built? The answer to these questions can reveal much about our true nature and about our capacity to survive the most devastating storms of human existence. The discovery happened on a Tuesday morning when Richard decided to leave the office early to surprise Sarah with lunch from the Italian restaurant she loved so much in the neighborhood. Traffic was surprisingly light, and he arrived home almost an hour earlier than expected. The front door was locked as always, but upon entering silently, he heard voices coming from the upstairs office. Sarah was on the phone, and her voice carried an intimacy that Richard didn't recognize. "Yes, honey, he still doesn't suspect anything," she said with a low conspiratorial laugh. "The lawyer said if we do everything right, I can get at least 60% of his assets. His company is worth way more than he realizes." Richard felt his blood freeze in his veins. He leaned against the stair wall, his heart beating so loudly he feared she might hear. "No, don't worry about the kids," Sarah continued. "They'll understand that sometimes parents need to take different paths. And besides, with the alimony he'll have to pay, I won't need to worry about money for a long time." The coldness in her voice was something Richard had never witnessed before. This was the woman he had shared a bed with for 15 years, the mother of his children, the person in whom he had placed all his trust. The phone was hung up, and Richard heard Sarah's footsteps coming down the stairs. Quickly, he went out the back door, walked around the house, and entered again through the front, making enough noise to announce his arrival. "Sarah, I'm home!" he shouted with the most natural voice he could produce. She appeared in the living room with a smile that he now realized was completely fake. "What a nice surprise, honey. I thought you'd only be back this afternoon." Richard forced a smile and kissed her cheek, feeling as if he were kissing a stranger. In the days that followed, Richard became a consummate actor in his own life. He maintained his normal routine, kissed Sarah in the morning, asked about her day, had dinner with the family, as if nothing had changed. But inside, a silent revolution was taking place. Every affectionate gesture from Sarah now felt like a stab. Every "I love you" sounded like a rehearsed lie. The pain was almost unbearable, but Richard had learned something valuable in business. Never reveal your cards before the right time. During lunch with his business partner and best friend Mike, Richard struggled to maintain his composure. "You've been acting strange lately," Mike observed, cutting his steak with precision. "Problems at home?" The question was innocent, but it hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. "No, everything's fine. Just worried about some contracts," he lied, avoiding his friend's gaze. It was impressive how lies began to become natural when trust was broken. That night, while Sarah slept beside him, Richard stayed awake, staring at the ceiling and processing the magnitude of the betrayal. 15 years of marriage, 2 children, an entire life built on what he now realized were foundations of sand. But one thing was clear in his mind. He would not be a passive victim of this situation. If Sarah wanted to play this game, He needed to learn the rules quickly and play better than she did. The true strength of a man is not measured by the ability to avoid storms, but by the skill to navigate them with wisdom and determination. Richard was about to discover reserves of courage and cunning he didn't even know he possessed. The battle had begun, but Sarah still had no idea that she would no longer be the only one planning the future of the Miller family. The first task was to understand exactly what he was dealing with. Richard began paying attention to details that had previously gone unnoticed. Sarah's sudden departures to meet a girlfriend, the whispered phone calls that were interrupted when he came near, the subtle changes in her appearance and behavior. Like a detective investigating a crime, he began mentally documenting everything, creating a map of the betrayal that was unfolding right under his nose. During a meeting with his accountant, Richard took the opportunity to ask some apparently innocent questions about asset protection. Hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to protect their assets from a potential contentious divorce, what measures could be taken? He asked, feigning academic interest. The accountant, an experienced man named Mr. Davidson, raised an eyebrow. That's a very specific question to be merely hypothetical, Richard. Let's say I'm being preventive, Richard replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Davidson nodded, completely understanding the subtext. There are several legal strategies. Documentation of individual contributions to marital assets, segregation of premarital property, creation of business holdings. But everything must be done within absolute legality, of course. Richard absorbed every word like a dedicated student. That night, while they dined as a family, Richard observed Sarah interacting with Emma and T. Weiler. The teenagers talked about school, complained about teachers, made plans for the weekend. Sarah laughed, asked questions, seemed like the dedicated mother she had always been. But Richard now saw the performance behind the naturalness. How many masks can a person wear at the same time? How many parallel lives is it possible to maintain without the weight of duplicity becoming unbearable? The second discovery came by chance, or perhaps by destiny, conspiring to reveal inconvenient truths. Richard had forgotten some documents at home and returned during lunch hour to get them. Upon entering silently, he heard voices coming from the living room. Sarah was not alone, and the male voice conversing with her was not from anyone in the family's acquaintance. Hidden behind the kitchen wall, Richard managed to hear fragments of the conversation that would change everything forever. "Richard really doesn't suspect anything?" asked the male voice, which Richard identified as belonging to someone younger. "He's so naive," Sarah replied with a cruel laugh. "He works so much he doesn't even notice what happens in his own house. We've been meeting here for months when he's not around." Richard's fist clenched involuntarily. Months. It wasn't something recent, but an established relationship, a systematic and calculated betrayal. "And you're sure the plan will work?" the voice continued. "I've been talking to my lawyer. With the right evidence, I can claim irreconcilable differences and still secure a good chunk of his assets. The idiot won't even know what hit him." Richard had to force himself not to come out from behind the wall and confront them right there. But something deeper than anger was taking shape in his mind. A cold and calculated determination. When the footsteps indicated they were going upstairs to the bedroom, Richard went out the back door, got the documents he needed from his home office through the external access, and returned to work. But his mind was no longer focused on contracts and reports. He was planning a strategy that Sarah could never imagine. If she wanted a war, she would have one, but with rules that only he would know. The investigation began the following morning. Richard discreetly hired the services of a private investigator recommended by a lawyer colleague. James P. Archer was a former police officer with 20 years of experience, specializing in marital infidelity cases. During the meeting at P. Archer's office, Richard explained the situation without showing excessive emotion. "I need concrete evidence," he said simply. "Photos, videos, financial records, whatever it takes to build an airtight case." Parker nodded professionally. "In cases like this, patience is everything. We need to document patterns, establish timelines, and gather evidence that will hold up in court. My fee is $200 per hour, plus expenses." Richard didn't hesitate. Money is not an issue. I want everything documented. The detective would begin work the following Monday, and Richard knew that every dollar invested in this investigation would be crucial to protecting his future and that of his children. Simultaneously, Richard began his own domestic investigation. He discreetly installed a small recording device in his home office, where Sarah usually made her more intimate calls. He also began photographing receipts for suspicious expenses, noting dates and times of her unexplained absences. Each piece of evidence was carefully cataloged and stored in a secure location that Sarah would never find. That week, during family dinner, T. Eiler casually mentioned, "Mom, who was that guy who came here last Tuesday? I saw a car leaving when I got home from soccer practice." Sarah choked slightly on her water. "Oh, it was just a repairman. The dishwasher was making a weird noise." Richard pretended not to pay attention to the conversation, but mentally noted another inconsistency in Sarah's version. The children, without realizing it, were becoming involuntary witnesses to their mother's duplicity. 2 weeks later, P. Archer called with the first significant findings. "We've got him," said the detective with professional satisfaction. "His name is Brad Coleman, 34 years old, personal trainer at the gym where your wife works out. They've been meeting regularly, and not just at your house. I have photos of them entering and leaving a motel downtown at least 6 times in the past 10 days. Richard felt a mixture of vindication and nausea. Knowing about the betrayal was one thing. Seeing tangible proof was something completely different. "There's more," P. Archer continued. "I tracked their text messages. She's using a secondary phone. Based on the message timestamps, this affair has been going on for at least 8 months. And get this, she's been using joint credit cards to pay for hotel rooms and expensive gifts for him. I have copies of all the receipts." Richard noted every detail meticulously. 8 months of lies. 8 months paid for with his own money. That night, Richard observed Sarah with a completely new perspective. She was sitting on the couch, apparently watching TV, but her fingers were typing rapidly on her phone. From time to time, a secret smile appeared on her face, the same smile she used to reserve for him in the early years of marriage. Now he knew who it was directed at, and the pain of this realization was almost unbearable. But Richard had learned to transform pain into fuel for his determination. Every lie from Sarah, every false gesture of affection, every empty "I love you" only strengthened his resolve. She had chosen to destroy their family for a selfish whim. Now he would make her pay for every lie, every betrayal, every moment stolen from his life and his children's. Richard's plan was taking shape with the precision of a military operation. Besides the photographic and financial evidence, he began recording his own conversations with Sarah, always within the legal limits allowed in the state where they lived. Every discussion about finances, every conversation about the family's future, every moment when she showed coldness or disinterest was carefully documented. During an apparently casual conversation about retirement plans, Sarah showed her true nature. "Honestly, Richard, sometimes I wonder if we're happy together. Maybe we're just staying married out of habit." It was an obvious bait, a test to see how he would react. Richard remained calm and replied, "Marriage requires work, but I believe in our commitment." Internally, he smiled as he realized how she was trying to plant seeds for her future claim of irreconcilable differences. That same week, Richard discovered something that completely changed the game. While going through bank statements more carefully, he noticed that Sarah had opened a secret checking account 6 months ago. Through his accountant, he discovered that she had been regularly transferring small amounts, a total of almost $15,000 that had disappeared from the family budget. It was misappropriation of marital funds, and Richard now had another card up his sleeve. The most impressive thing was how Sarah managed to maintain the facade. In front of the children, she continued being the loving mother she had always been. At social gatherings, she perfectly played the role of the dedicated wife. But Richard could now see through her performance, noticing the micro-signals that revealed her true nature. The disguised impatience when he talked about work, the empty look when he tried to be affectionate, the rush to end any intimate moment between them. The final confirmation came when Richard decided to make a definitive test. He pretended a business trip to Chicago that would last 3 days, but actually stayed at a local hotel to observe Sarah's movements. As expected, on the first night of his supposed absence, Brad Coleman appeared at the family home at 8:30 p.m. and only left the next morning at 6:45 a.m. P. Archer managed to get explicit photos of them entering and leaving together, plus images through the windows that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. During those 3 days, Richard also discovered that Sarah had lied to Emma and T. Eiler, telling them she would spend the nights at her sister's house to take care of Grandma, who was sick. But Sarah's grandmother was perfectly well. Richard checked personally. It was shocking to realize how she lied not only to her husband, but also to her own children, using them as alibis for her illicit encounters. On the second night, Richard witnessed something that almost made him lose his composure. Sarah and Brad were in the kitchen of the house, his kitchen, preparing dinner together, laughing and kissing like a couple in love. They used the table where Richard dined with the family every night, drank the wine he had saved for a special occasion, slept in the matrimonial bed he had bought when Emma was born. It was a complete desecration of everything he considered sacred in his family life. But amid the pain and revolt, Richard kept his focus on the final objective. Each piece of evidence collected, each documented lie, each recorded violation would be a fundamental piece on the chessboard he was setting up. Sarah thought she was playing alone, but she was actually being observed and documented in every move. The game was about to change direction dramatically. With solid evidence in hand, Richard scheduled a meeting with Jennifer W. Alsh, one of the most respected divorce attorneys in the city. Alsh had a reputation for being ruthless in cases of infidelity and marital bad faith. During the initial consultation, Richard meticulously presented all the documentation collected: photos, recordings, bank statements, call records, and the complete timeline of Sarah's betrayal. "This is one of the most well-documented cases I've ever seen," commented W. Alsh, reviewing the files with professional admiration. "With evidence like this, we can not only secure a favorable division of assets, but also potentially pursue charges of financial misconduct. The secret account and unauthorized use of marital funds give us significant leverage." Richard felt a cold satisfaction hearing this. Months of careful planning were finally materializing into concrete legal advantage. Walsh explained the strategy. First, they would discreetly protect Richard's assets through preventive legal measures. Second, when Sarah eventually asked for divorce, as the evidence suggested she would, they would be completely prepared to counterattack with a mountain of irrefutable proof. "The key is to let her make the first move," explained the attorney. "When she files, thinking she has the upper hand, we'll hit her with everything at once." Richard returned home that night with a sense of power he hadn't felt in months. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, he managed to have dinner with the family without feeling nauseous. Sarah chattered about her day at the spa, a lie. He knew she had spent the afternoon with Brad, while Emma and T. Weiler talked about their school projects. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but underneath, a silent revolution was underway. That night, while Sarah slept beside him, Richard allowed himself a rare smile. She had no idea of the hurricane that was about to hit her. She had spent months planning her perfect escape, thinking Richard was too naive to suspect, but in reality, she had completely underestimated the man she was married to. And this underestimation would be her complete ruin. 3 weeks later, the moment Richard had been waiting for finally arrived. Sarah asked to talk with him after dinner when the children were in their rooms doing homework. She sat on the couch with an expression that tried to convey sadness and hesitation. But Richard could now see the acting behind the mask. "Richard, we need to talk about our marriage," she began, with her voice trembling theatrically. "I've been thinking a lot lately, and I don't think we're happy together anymore," Sarah continued, following exactly the script Richard had predicted. "Maybe we've grown apart. Maybe we want different things from life. I think we should consider separation." She paused dramatically, expecting to see shock or despair on her husband's face. Instead, Richard nodded calmly, as if he were considering a business proposal. "If that's what you think is best," Richard replied with a tranquility that clearly disconcerted her. Sarah had expected tears, pleas, promises of change. Richard's serene reaction wasn't in her plans. "I mean, I'd prefer that we tried couples therapy first," she quickly improvised, trying to regain control of the narrative. "But if you're already decided." Richard smiled internally. She was trying to make it seem like he was the one to blame for the separation. "I think you've already made your decision, Sarah," Richard said softly, "and I respect that. W.E. should probably talk to a lawyer about the best way to handle this, especially considering Emma and T. Eiler." Sarah nodded, clearly relieved that he was being reasonable. She had no idea that she had just fallen into the most elaborate trap of her life. The game had officially begun, and Richard was already several moves ahead. In the days following Sarah's request for separation, Richard observed with morbid fascination how she behaved like an actress who could finally relax after a long and tiring performance. She was happier, more animated, clearly relieved that she no longer had to pretend love for him. She began going out more frequently, claiming she needed time to think and space to process the decision. During one of these absences, Richard took the opportunity to review all legal documents with W. Alsh. "She's moving faster than we anticipated," observed the attorney. "My contacts at other law firms tell me she's been shopping around for representation. Apparently she's telling lawyers that you two simply grew apart and that she wants an amicable division of assets." Richard laughed bitterly. Amicable. After 8 months of systematic betrayal and financial theft, Walsh had prepared a surprise for Sarah. "When she files the papers, we're going to request a full financial disclosure from both parties. That secret account she thinks you don't know about, it's going to surface immediately, and when it does, her credibility as the innocent party seeking an amicable divorce will be completely destroyed." Richard appreciated the irony. Sarah had spent months planning her strategy, but all her maneuvers were being anticipated and neutralized. That night, during dinner, T. Eiler made an innocent observation that almost made Richard choke on his food. "Mom, why have you been so happy lately? Why, you're like singing in the shower and stuff." Sarah blushed slightly, but quickly recovered her composure. "I'm just trying to stay positive during a difficult period for our family," she replied, touching Tyler's arm maternally. Richard marveled at her ability to manipulate even her own children's perceptions. The bomb exploded on a Thursday morning when Sarah finally delivered the divorce papers. She had chosen a moment when the children were at school, probably expecting a dramatic scene she could later use to portray Richard as unstable or violent. Instead, he read the documents calmly, nodded, and said, "I'll have my lawyer review these and respond accordingly." Sarah seemed almost disappointed with his reaction. "That's it?" she asked, clearly expecting more resistance. "Why, you're not going to fight this?" Richard looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Sarah, if you've decided that our marriage is over, then I guess it's over. I just want what's best for Emma and T. Weiler." It was an Oscar-worthy performance, and Richard could see that she was starting to feel guilty, or at least pretending to feel guilty. What Sarah didn't know was that, while she was delivering her papers, W. Alsh was already at the courthouse filing a much more comprehensive counter-petition. While Sarah asked for an equitable division of assets, Richard was officially accusing her of adultery, financial misconduct, and breach of marital trust. The documents included a request for full disclosure of all accounts and transactions from the past 2 years. That afternoon, Richard received a furious call from T.M. Bradley, the lawyer Sarah had hired. "What the hell is this counter-petition, Miller? This was supposed to be an uncontested divorce." Richard kept his voice calm and professional. "My wife filed for divorce, Mr. Bradley. I'm simply responding through the appropriate legal channels." He could hear Sarah screaming in the background of the call. The mask had finally fallen. The discovery of the secret account caused an earthquake in the case. When the court ordered complete asset disclosure, Sarah was forced to reveal the $15,000 she had hidden, plus all suspicious transactions from recent months. Bradley tried to argue it was money Sarah had saved for family emergencies. but the evidence clearly showed expenses on hotels, expensive gifts, and even lingerie she had never worn with Richard. Walsh leveraged the advantage mercilessly. Why our honor? The defendant not only engaged in a prolonged extramarital affair, but systematically diverted marital funds to support this relationship. The evidence shows a pattern of deception and financial misconduct that goes far beyond simple marital discord. The photographs of Sarah and Brad were presented as evidence, along with the hotel receipts paid with the couple's joint cards. The most devastating moment was when W. Walsh presented the recordings of Sarah's phone conversations. Her own voice, cold and calculating, talking about how the idiot won't know what hit him, and planning to take at least 60% of Richard's assets. The judge listened to everything with an increasingly severe expression, while Sarah shrank in the chair next to her attorney, who clearly had not been prepared for this level of evidence. Bradley asked for a recess, but the damage was already done. In the courthouse corridors, Richard saw Sarah cry for the first time in months, but now he knew these were tears of despair and anger, not genuine sadness. "How could you do this to me?" she whispered as she passed by him. Richard looked at her with a coldness she had never seen. "I learned from the best, Sarah." The irony was delicious. She was being destroyed by the same tactics she had planned to use against him. As the legal battle intensified, Richard observed with scientific satisfaction how Sarah's carefully constructed life began to crumble. News of the betrayal and litigious process spread rapidly through their social circle. The friends who had previously supported her in her complaints about the marriage now avoided her, especially after the sordid details of the affair became public. Brad Coleman, the personal trainer for whom Sarah had risked everything, disappeared from her life as soon as the scandal came to light. Apparently, secret romances were exciting, but being publicly exposed as the man who destroyed a family wasn't exactly what he had signed up for. Sarah tried to contact him desperately, but he had blocked all means of communication. The great love had revealed itself to be a coward when things got difficult. At work, Sarah faced whispers and judgmental looks. Her reputation as a marketing manager at a conservative family company was ruined. Richard learned from internal sources that she was being encouraged to seek opportunities elsewhere. The irony was cruel. While she had planned to live comfortably off his money after the divorce, she now faced the prospect of losing her own source of income as well. Emma and T. Eiler, initially confused by the situation, began asking more direct questions about why Mom was always crying and Dad seemed so calm. Richard was careful not to poison them against their mother, but he also didn't lie when they asked directly about what was happening. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love, he explained simply, and when that happens, there are consequences. The children were more perceptive than Sarah had imagined, and gradually began to piece together the truth. The final blow came when W. Walsh presented evidence that Sarah had tried to manipulate the children against Richard. Secret recordings showed her telling Emma and T. Weiler that Dad doesn't love us anymore, and that he wants to abandon us to work more. It was a subtle but systematic campaign to turn the children against their father, hoping to secure custody and higher child support. Emma, then 16 years old, was brave enough to testify that she had felt pressured by her mother to choose sides, and that many of the things Sarah had said about Richard simply weren't true. "Dad never missed a recital or soccer game," she told the judge with tears in her eyes. "Mom always said he didn't care, but he always cared more about us than anything." It was a devastating moment for Sarah, seeing her own daughter contradicting her narrative. Tyler, though younger, had also noticed inconsistencies. He told the court about the times Sarah had lied about where she was going, and how she always seemed more interested in her phone than in the family during dinner. "Dad makes us breakfast every morning and helps with homework every night," he said simply. "Mom, she's always busy with other things." The brutal innocence of the children's words was more damaging than any legal argument. Richard felt a mixture of vindication and sadness watching Sarah's world crumble. Part of him still remembered the woman he had loved, a mother who used to read bedtime stories to their children, a partner who once shared his dreams. But that person had been replaced by someone cold and calculating, someone willing to destroy her own family for personal gain. And now, finally, justice was being served. The sentence was more severe than even W. Alsh had predicted. The judge, clearly disgusted with the evidence of infidelity, financial misconduct, and child manipulation, awarded Richard not only primary custody of the children, but also 75% of the marital assets. Sarah's attempt to secure alimony was rejected outright, and she was ordered to reimburse Richard for the funds she had diverted to her secret account. The evidence presented to this court, declared the judge with stern authority, shows a pattern of deliberate deception, financial impropriety, and emotional manipulation that is fundamentally incompatible with the concept of equitable marital dissolution. The defendant's actions demonstrate a willful disregard for both marital obligations and parental responsibilities. Each word was a dagger to Sarah's remaining hopes. Even more devastating was the order for Sarah to pay Richard's legal fees, an amount that totaled almost $50,000. Between lawyer costs, asset division, and loss of her job prospects, Sarah faced financial ruin. The woman who had planned to live comfortably off Richard's wealth now confronted a future of uncertainty and struggle. The irony was not lost on anyone in the courtroom. After sentencing, Richard finally allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Months of careful planning, strategic patience, and meticulous documentation had paid off completely. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been served cold, calculated, and absolutely. Sarah had learned that actions have consequences, and that underestimating your opponent can be a fatal mistake in any battle. In the months following the divorce, Richard focused on rebuilding a normal life for Emma and T. Weiler. The house that had once been filled with tension and lies now became a sanctuary of honesty and genuine affection. The children, initially traumatized by the dissolution of their parents' marriage, gradually began to heal in an environment where they didn't have to navigate constant manipulation and false narratives. Sarah, meanwhile, struggled to rebuild her life from the ashes of her own making. She had moved to a small apartment across town, took a job as a sales associate at a department store, and tried to maintain some semblance of dignity. Her requests for increased visitation with the children were consistently denied by the court, especially after Emma and T. Eiler both expressed preference for minimal contact. The master manipulator had lost not only her husband's trust, but also her children's love. Richard occasionally encountered Sarah during child pickup exchanges, briefly and awkwardly supervised meetings that were painful for both parties. She looked older, worn down by stress and regret. Sometimes he thought he saw glimpses of the woman he had once loved, moments when her mask slipped and genuine sorrow showed through. But those moments passed quickly, replaced by rehearsed attempts to appear as a victim of circumstances rather than architect of her own destruction. The most poetic justice came when Brad Coleman, the personal trainer for whom Sarah had risked everything, was arrested for financial fraud in an unrelated case. Apparently, seducing married women and encouraging them to steal from their husbands was just one part of a broader pattern of criminal behavior. Sarah's great love turned out to be nothing more than another predator who had manipulated her, just as she had tried to manipulate Richard. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, Richard stood in his backyard watching Emma and T. Weiler play with their friends. The children were laughing, genuinely happy in a way that hadn't been possible during the dark months of Sarah's deception. They still saw their mother occasionally, but both had chosen to spend most of their time with Richard, preferring an environment of stability and honesty. The business that Sarah had tried to take half of was now thriving more than ever. Without the constant undercurrent of tension and betrayal at home, Richard found himself more focused and productive. His partnership with Mike had expanded. They had won several major contracts, and financial security for Emma and T. Weiler's future was absolutely guaranteed. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. Richard hadn't dated since the divorce. He wasn't ready to trust again, and honestly, he found deep satisfaction in being a single father who could give his children all the attention they deserved. Emma was excelling in school and had been accepted to her top choice college with a partial scholarship. Tyler was thriving in both academics and sports, showing none of the anxiety that had marked his behavior during Sarah's campaign of manipulation. As for Sarah herself, Richard heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. She had apparently moved to another state, trying to start fresh somewhere her reputation hadn't preceded her. Some people whispered that she deserved compassion, that everyone makes mistakes, that Richard had been too harsh. But Richard knew something those people didn't understand. Mercy without justice isn't mercy at all. It's just enabling bad behavior to continue. The story of Richard Miller teaches us a fundamental lesson about human nature. Not everyone who seems closest to us is worthy of our absolute trust. Sarah had built an elaborate facade of devotion while systematically betraying every value she supposedly shared with her husband. But her greatest mistake was underestimating a man she thought she knew completely. Richard's victory wasn't just legal or financial. It was a triumph of patience over impulse, of strategic thinking over emotional reaction. Instead of confronting Sarah when he first discovered her betrayal, he chose to gather evidence, build a case, and fight back with intelligence rather than anger. His approach demonstrates that sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't immediate retaliation, but careful preparation for justice. For those who find themselves facing similar betrayals, Richard's story offers both warning and hope. A warning that the people we trust most can be hiding devastating secrets, living double lives that would shock us if revealed, but also hope that truth eventually surfaces, that careful documentation and strategic thinking can overcome even the most elaborate deceptions, and that justice, when properly pursued, can prevail against those who believe they're above consequences. The final lesson is perhaps the most important. Revenge alone is empty if it doesn't serve a greater purpose. Richard didn't destroy Sarah simply to hurt her. He fought to protect his children, secure their future, and ensure that her pattern of manipulation wouldn't continue to damage innocent people. When justice serves protection rather than mere vengeance, it becomes not just satisfying, but truly meaningful. What would you do if you discovered that your entire life had been built on lies? How would you respond if someone you trusted completely was systematically plotting your destruction? Richard Miller's story suggests that with patience, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to truth, even the most devastating betrayals can be transformed into opportunities for justice and redemption. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to support more stories like this one. And if you really enjoyed this story and want to support this work, help me with a coffee on Ko-Fi. Your contribution, no matter how small, makes all the difference so that new stories like this continue to be told.